Are we a nation of defense freeloaders? Should AI decide who gets welfare? And is Winston buying me a rugby team? Welcome to the Select Committee. So we are doing our weekly politics breakdown, and the big news of this week is that the American Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has said we are a nation of defense freeloaders. Josiah, what's going on?
Yes, so there was a defence conference in Singapore, and during that conference, the US Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, commended a number of countries, including South Korea, Japan, Australia, for their defence spending. And a New Zealand journalist who was at the conference asked, well, what about New Zealand? We're currently at the 1% mark of GDP, but we're heading toward the 2% mark.
I couldn't help but notice that New Zealand was missing from your list of countries there. Would you consider New Zealand to be a free rider?
New Zealand, I appreciate the question. Listen, if I'm being honest, 2% is not enough, and so 2% is freeloading. But I don't have anything against New Zealand. I want partners to step up. I didn't intentionally leave it off my list.
And he characterised that as freeloading and explained that for partners, he expects them to have the same capabilities that the US has, otherwise it's pointless. And so it's possibly unsurprising that Pete Hegseth describes New Zealand that way. NATO countries are being encouraged and in fact have agreed to a 3.5% commitment of GDP for defence spending. So I guess the question for us is, well, one, are we freeloading? And two, can we even afford to meet the 3.5% threshold that Pete Hegseth seems us to want to achieve?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a bit about this because there's been a lot of noise made about defence spending in New Zealand, and the current government is talking a good game about how they are increasing towards 2% of GDP. And so I was trying to wrap my head around, what are we spending money on and how much sense does it make? And so the overall budget package, there was this big announcement of $1.5 billion in defence. And so the government proudly said they were increasing our spending to that, and the opposition made some criticisms of this big defence spend. So $1.5 billion. Now, for context, the interest we pay every year on our debt is $9.6 billion. So significantly more than our defence spend. But this $1.5 billion isn't our every year spend, right? So $700 million of it is capital spendings, that's investing in infrastructure. And $880 million over 4 years is the operating spend, what we're actually spending to do military stuff. So 880 over 4 years, divided by 4, 220 million. And you really go diving into the numbers and you see that they're increasing the operating spend on our defense by only $85 million a year. It's not nothing, it's worthwhile, I'm not criticizing it, but it's interesting how much we are spending a lot of money has become the narrative. And I'm not sure that's actually really true.
Yeah, Defence Minister Chris Pink mentioned that over the past two budgets, $5.8 billion of additional funding had been allocated to defence. I mean, that sounds impressive, but you're suggesting that maybe it's not as impressive as we might think?
I think the journalism around budgets is really difficult because you've got this capital expenditure, you've got this operating expenditure, and you're always dealing with big numbers, so it sounds like a lot. But if you get the annual operating spend, which you have to kind of go digging through some press releases, it's not the headline figure because they're wanting it to sound big. I think it's a less significant shift than we like to think, particularly because, say, the capital expenditure, that investment in equipment, $143 million of that, so about a quarter of that, is maintaining the boats we already have that are getting old, so they get more costly to maintain. So it's not like we're just splashing cash on new toys. We're sort of keeping things running that are pretty old. But the story didn't end with just, our spending levels. There was some talk about nuclear submarines or New Zealand's ban on nuclear ships in our waters. Becky, do you have thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think the key difference here is, nuclear sounds terrible. We've all heard nuclear weapons for mass destruction. And I think in the 80s, New Zealand took a really serious stance on nuclear warfare. However, our nuclear propulsion kind of got popped or bundled into that package together. And I think the difference is that there is a difference. And I think that's what the point is here, is that nuclear weapons designed to produce mass destruction, whereas nuclear propulsion is designed for power generation and submarines. It makes them quieter, they don't need to be refueled, and it would be a significant amount of work to turn one of those submarines that is powered, has nuclear propulsion powering it, into an actual weapon, and that's not why we would do that. And so I think the issue is that there's a difference here, and I think a lot of us are still living in the 80s with that mindset, anything nuclear means destruction, but it simply doesn't. It's actually power generation.
And so it's the interesting thing where, Defence Minister Chris Pink kind of floated, maybe we should have a conversation about this. He was sort of he was sort of, floating a balloon to see what would happen, and then immediately is shut down by the Prime Minister. That comes out very strongly. New Zealanders are proud of our anti-nuclear stance because the opposition had come out very quickly as well. Josiah, are we too cautious about this conversation?
I think we're really cautious about it, and in an insane way. I really struggle to understand what the issue is with nuclear propulsion. And Australia is actually our only formal ally. So if we get attacked, the only one who actually, by agreement, has to come to our aid is Australia. They're set to acquire nuclear-powered submarines in the not-too-distant future. And currently, New Zealand law would forbid an allied vessel coming into New Zealand waters. So to me, for Chris Pink to sort of float the idea of, hey, maybe we should have this conversation, didn't seem surprising to me at all. But what did seem surprising was the immediate shutdown from Luxon. It was unequivocal. He said, as long as I'm Prime Minister, our nuclear stance will not change. So I wonder whether this is a cultural element which seems to be passed on from generation to generation. And I don't know, maybe as someone a bit younger, I'm kind of thinking, well, okay, but what's wrong with nuclear propulsion?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a conversation that isn't happening in the short term, clearly been shut down. But, maybe over the coming years it'll keep cropping up and we'll see whether New Zealand is willing to move on. Something in our cultural moment has shifted. Across the globe, people feel more disconnected than ever. Yet paradoxically, they're also more tribal. These are symptoms of what Dr. Sarah Irving Stonebreaker calls our ahistoric age. At this year's Sir John Graham lecture, she will explore where we are, how we got here, and how a deeper understanding of our history can help us chart a way forward. The lecture is Friday, 17th of July at the Pullman Hotel. Go to maxim.org.nz for more details and to buy your tickets. So the next story we have on our agenda, late last week, the government under urgency passed an amendment, first reading, to the Social Security Bill, wanting to modernise how Social Security, how welfare services are delivered. And one of the key changes that are being brought in is that it enables greater use of artificial intelligence tools to make decisions, to exercise powers, and essentially to deliver Social Security. So, the bill is wanting to, create the capacity for Ministry of Social Development or others to use AI tools. And a lot of people are quite uncomfortable about it. Becky, what are your thoughts?
I think my thoughts initially are that for human cases, like welfare benefit cases, there is an individual story that every family has or every individual has. And so I think my gut instinct is to say, is an AI tool going to appropriately assess each case? And so I feel a little bit off about it because I actually think you really need that human interaction. You need someone to see the whole story. And I think you already see a big bureaucratic sort of separation between people. And I think that might only serve to widen the divide. However, there are issues in efficiency and that is causing families to miss out. And so I can see the need for a tool to help increase efficiency, but I'm cautious about humans becoming less engaged with real human stories.
And Josiah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I share, the similar reservations, and I think this highlights one of the tensions that we have whenever we're talking about politics and helping people. People are relational beings, and the core challenges they face can only be addressed within the context of community and relationship. A faceless bureaucracy can't do that. Nonetheless, a faceless bureaucracy must have seemingly arbitrary cut-off points about who receives what. And so National Scott Simpson explained that the expansion of powers that would allow for automation to be used will still only apply to simple rules-based decisions. And so I think if you've got possibly millions of decisions being made about eligibility, and if they are simple yes or no qualify or no qualify, this does seem like a useful application of this tool to save time. However, there is the question of transparency and accountability. Well, what if they get it wrong? And what about the human element involved in welfare provision? So I think I'm cautiously supportive, but I see some issues that could come in. And I think Ricardo Menendez-March has a point when he explains that this is a carte blanche expansion, because if you read the provision of the legislation, the word any is used a number of times. So a specified person can make any decision, exercise any power, comply with any obligation, or take up any other related action under any specified position with appropriate safeguards. Now, I understand those safeguards will be developed in consultation with the Privacy Commission and the Human Rights Commission, so that's good. And I think this is a starting point. We don't have a lot of details yet, but I think there are some really important questions that we need to, engage with around this topic of AI and government, which I guess leads us to the release of our paper, which came out today. Great timing. Thomas, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so our latest paper out with Maxim, so it's written by my colleague Paul Henderson, and I'm a co-author as well. Title is Algorithmic Government, of the people, for the people, by AI?
Question mark.
We're asking the question, what happens when algorithms and artificial intelligence tools become more and more used in government provision? And so what we're kind of saying is that this is coming and is happening now, that artificial intelligence and algorithms are already making substantive decisions, both in New Zealand and overseas. And that will increasingly be an option, but there are risks with it. Are we maintaining a democratic society? And are we kind of wrestling with the political and moral questions we need to, and not just letting the algorithm make decisions for us? And so when we think about an issue like this with welfare provision and deciding who gets what, one of our key recommendations and points in the paper is this notion of cognitive forcing, that simply having a human in the loop is not enough. So when we think about, how do we make a decision about who gets welfare? Well, perhaps we could have an artificial intelligence tool kind of make a kind of decision, but then what if we put a human there to kind of check? That's what a lot of people do, is say a human in the loop. Our observation and our argument is that humans, over time, we have a sort of a laziness in how we do things. If a machine keeps making recommendations, eventually we will just rubber stamp. We'll be like, yes, that seems pretty good, that seems pretty good, that seems pretty good. So what we actually have to do is force the humans in the decision-making process to use their brains, to exercise their judgment before they draw on artificial intelligence tools. It's not that there's never a case for them. We think these are going to be increasingly useful over the coming years. It's a major technological shift, but we have to be careful that we are actually happy with the decisions that are being made and having those tough political conversations.
And I guess the accountability angle comes in there as well. If a human is only a rubber stamp, well, are they really making the decisions, and are they really accountable? Which is why it's important that actually it's transparent and open and challengeable.
Absolutely. So with the legislation itself, it's still tying AI tools to a specified person. So we like that. That's good. A specified person is using an AI tool. But we want to make sure that that person is actually proactively engaged with it. So, check it out on our website, Algorithmic Government, by Paul Henderson and me. It's a page turner. Highly recommend. Now, our final big story of the week. In the latest, episode in Winston Peters is buying me things. I heard he is buying me a rugby team. Becky, what's going on?
Well, he might be, Thomas. So Moana Pasifika, New Zealand and the Pacific Super Rugby team entered into liquidation in late May 2026 with a debt of roughly $2.7 million. And so Foreign Minister and New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters, as you mentioned before, is holding peace talks with Pacific leaders and discussions around the struggling franchise's future. And so there's been urgent engagement as well with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials and New Zealand Rugby to explore all possible options. So he hasn't said 100% I am buying Moana Pasifika, but he's basically said this is really important. And I mean, it serves as a professional pathway for Pacifica players and a movement aimed at empowering Pacific communities. And in New Zealand alone, we have more Samoans living in New Zealand than we do in Samoa. And so you can see why it's a really important thing for New Zealand. However, I know National Party are not quite so keen. They're looking at the money and going, I don't know if this makes sense. So it's an interesting conversation, particularly because, as you mentioned before, Winston is sort of buying a few things lately. He seems quite set on, no, this is what we need and this is what I'm going to put my money towards.
I mean, he's sort of living the dream about you getting into government. What do you do? I love trains as a kid, I always had my train set. Well, he's wanting to buy some trains, and now rugby. I also love that. But I am confused. I get, there's a cultural value. We love rugby in New Zealand. There's the Pacifica kind of distinctiveness of the team. But do we need government investing in a Super Rugby team, Josiah? Because I'm skeptical.
I think there are two ways of seeing it. There's an economic argument, and I think the market forces have maybe made the case quite clearly. Winston Peters, as Becky mentioned, has gone out to try and secure some funding from Samoa and Tonga and maybe others. And there's also talk of an LA millionaire or billionaire relocating the team to Hawaii. The former CEO of NZ Rugby was on the radio recently, and he expressed Basically, the reality that if they're going to buy the team, they have to be willing to lose a lot of money, because rugby is not making money around the world. For a new team like this that's really struggling, I think it's quite unlikely. So that's the economic side of things. Aside, so what about politically or geopolitically? Why might we put our hard-earned taxpayer dollars behind this thing when we're in a time where finances are tight, and which is why National and ACT are hesitant to support it? And we only have to look across the ditch for a reason as to why that may be. So it may surprise you to learn that Australia actually has a sports diplomacy strategy, and along with that, a sports diplomacy fund, which we're hoping we might receive some cash for the Moana Pasifika team. But the idea really goes like this. There are countries in the Indo-Pacific that we want to be friends with. There are other players who also want to exercise influence, and one of those players has got a lot of money, and so they leverage debt and infrastructure in order to garner that influence. Solomon Islands is an example of a country who's been courted by this aforementioned country, China, and the Cook Islands as well, who have recently taken a more pro-China stance and have now come back. And so the idea is, well, maybe we can exercise some cultural influence to, strengthen those relationships, those ties. And so Australia did that recently with Papua New Guinea's rugby league team, which will hit the NRL in 2028, and it gave the team $600 million of Australian capital for that to happen. So it's certainly an exercise in soft power. There's a strategy there. The question is, do we think it's worth it? Do we think it will actually achieve the things we hope it will achieve? I guess with any investment, we don't know. It's a risk. So I am probably skeptical as well, but I think there is possibly a case to be made for it as an important connection with significant Pacific Island nations who we do want to maintain strong relations with.
Oh, well, we'll have to watch this space to see whether Winston really manages to pull it off to keep the team alive, because, as a rugby fan, I'd be keen to see it flourish if he can make the numbers work. And so that brings us now to the highlight of the episode, as ever, fantasy Beehive for the tragics among you. We draft our politicians every week, 3 people, and our highly secret algorithm determines who scores the most points each week, who has done well in the media, who's got bills through Parliament, or who has been asking questions in the House. So, who were our star performers this week, Josiah?
Well, my star performer was Simeon Brown. He had an excellent performance, and that was helped in no small part due to the fact that he had a bill pass a first, second and third reading under urgency, and so instantly you're racking up the points there. So he scored me 33 points. I had a couple of other players who contributed to my score, but strong performance from Simeon Brown. He also had some good media attention around some budget announcements to do with his portfolio, so health funding, some funding around solar panels for schools, so all good things that are enhancing his reputation and good points for him. So definitely my standout performer this week.
What about you, Becky?
My standout performer was Chris Bishop. Well, I voted for him because I was like, it's Chris Bishop. He's just always in the media. And also he opened 7 new specialist social houses for autistic individuals this week. And he made sure to say that this was funded from the budget in 2024. And so, I was hoping he did well.
Well, I mean, that's a great lesson, right? It's not just enough to show up at the good thing. You got to claim credit and be like, it's not just we're opening a school and this is a good thing. Budget 2024 is one that he can say it was his success story. So always be selling. He's learned the lesson. Now, I picked my team this week, and they are all wonderful people who I could speak very, very highly of. What they didn't do that well at was scoring any points this week. And
Isn't that the point? Or?
Well, I mean, I'm sure they did many wonderful things, but none of it made it into the parliamentary order paper, and none of it made it into media headlines. So I'm sure they were working hard, and I'm not going to throw my picks under the bus. So I am going to shamelessly pick from the bucket of who performed really well, and I did not pick, because I'm not going to claim that I saw that Cameron Brewer was going to run the floor with his performance this week. But Cameron Brewer is the Minister for Commerce and Consumer Affairs. That's one we all pay a lot of attention to. He's also Small Business and Manufacturing and an Associate Immigration Minister. So he's a minister with some smaller portfolios, but he got 3 bills through their third reading, 2 bills through their second reading, and 1 bill through its first reading. So he was working hard and racking up wins this week. So he was a very strong performer who I did not pick. So when we look at our scores, overall, Becky, what did you get?
If I remember correctly, I got 8. So
8?
Not too high, but you know what? I think it might be better than some players on this team.
Yeah, well, cards on the table. I got 4 points, which, if you know what we're kind of aiming, you're kind of aiming for something certainly well above 20. Josiah, what did you get?
Yeah, I mean, it feels bad for me to say this, but I did get 37 points.
All right.
I mean, I commend your effort this week and would just encourage you to try harder next week.
Well, we will try again next week and see if we can do better. So thank you very much for joining us for another episode of the Select Committee. We release one of these every week talking about all the political stories that really matter. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.